The following talk is offered freely to ensure that no one is ever denied access to these practices and to these teachings. If you feel inspired to make a donation to support this offering, you can go to my website at jonathanfoust.com. While you're there, you can also sign up for a monthly newsletter designed to support you in your practice. Thank you, and enjoy. In many spiritual traditions, over the years, and particularly in lineage traditions, there's a tendency to kind of put teachers on pedestals, to kind of deify them a little bit. And a lot of, I like to think, our shifting consciousness now has outed a lot of teachers, wherever. It's as if our culture can no longer tolerate, abuse, power over others. So quite often when I read the words from, kind of a classic teacher, it's not uncommon, I'll get an email from someone saying, this guy was a jerk, And so I think it's important when I read from someone, particularly reading from Shunryu Suzuki, his brilliance as a teacher, and also to acknowledge he was very human. So if you're familiar with him, he wrote Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, which was kind of the seminal teaching, introduced so many people to practice. And again, a flawed human being. I think, if I'm not mistaken, his wife said, a wonderful teacher, terrible husband. But this is one of his classic offerings, which I find so helpful. It's rather long, but it says so much. And he talks about the practice of Zen. And when I read this, I'm going to substitute the word meditation for Zen. Just a little prelude here. He writes, "It is said there are 4 kinds of horses: excellent ones, good ones, poor ones, and bad ones. The best horse will run slow and fast, right and left at the driver's will, before it sees the shadow of the whip. The second best will run as well as the first one does, just before the whip reaches its skin. The third one will run when it feels pain on its body. The fourth one will run after the pain penetrates to the marrow of its bones. And you can imagine how difficult it is for the fourth one to learn how to run." When we hear this story, almost all of us want to be the best horse. If it is not possible to be the best one, we want to be the second best. That is, I think, the usual understanding of this story and of meditation. You may think that when you sit in meditation, you will find out if you are one of the best horses or one of the worst horses. Here, however, there is a misunderstanding of meditation. If you think the aim of meditation practice is to train you to become one of the best horses, you will have a big problem. That is not the right understanding. If you practice meditation in the right way, it does not matter whether you are the best horse or the worst one. When you consider the mercy of the Buddha, how do you think the Buddha will feel about the 4 kinds of horses? He will have more sympathy for the worst one than the best one. When you are determined to practice meditation with the great mind of the Buddha, you will find the worst horse is the most valuable one. In your very imperfections, you will find the basis for your way-seeking mind. Those who can sit perfectly still physically usually take more time to obtain the true way of meditation, the actual feeling of meditation, the marrow of meditation. But those who find great difficulties in practicing meditation will find more meaning in it. So I think that sometimes the best horse may be the worst one, and the worst horse may be the best one. If you study calligraphy, you will find that those who are not so clever usually become the best calligraphers. Those who are very clever with their hands often encounter great difficulty after they've reached a certain stage. That is true in art and in meditation and in life. So when we talk about meditation, we cannot say she is good or she is bad in the ordinary sense of the words. So this is a concept that we have in life as well as in meditation. We think in meditation, the meditations where you're not having crazy, crazy thoughts, you have some moments of presence, you think those are the good ones. We tend to think the meditations where your mind is just wild, impossible to control, those are the bad ones. But which one really trains your mind better? We have that same sense in life, that if there are no challenges in life, then life is really good. It's all smooth sailing. When actually, it's the challenges that provide your deepest growth. So I'd like to talk a little bit tonight of how in this practice of meditation and in life, how the obstacles are the path itself. For many, many years, I thought that the object of meditation was to clear my mind. So whenever one of the 5 hindrances would arise, anger, aversion, blame, or fantasy, planning, disassociation, or worry, restlessness, or sloth, or torpor, or doubt, or fear, I used to think it was all about eliminating those. And I've actually come to see that when I can really investigate those, there are profound teachings. There are possibilities that open up that I wasn't aware of before. So I'd like to talk about how when you take on an obstacle, sometimes it goes against all of your primal instincts. And how when you really take on this practice of embracing the obstacles in your life, they can transform you. But even more than that, they can transform other people in your life too. And how when you take on this philosophy of embracing the obstacles, how it dramatically changes your perspective on life and opens up the possibility of a real skill building and mastery. I was struck by a story I heard about the comic Sarah Silverman. If you know Sarah Silverman, she's pretty hilarious. She's pretty profane. She kind of thrives on shock. And she uses Twitter a lot. So she kind of pumps out a lot of pretty crazy stuff. And a man from San Antonio responded to one of her tweets with some incredibly profane and ugly language. And even she was shocked by his response, just how ugly it was. And something inspired her before she responded to check this guy out. And she saw on his profile that he was dealing with incredible back pain. And so she tweeted back to him, and she said, she said, I believe in you. I read your timeline, I see what you're doing, and I think your rage is thinly veiled pain, but you know that. And I know this feeling too. I also have horrible back pain. See what happens when you choose love. And this guy responded. He said, I can't choose love. A man that resembles Kevin Spacey took that away when I was 8. I can't find peace. If I could find that guy who ripped my body and who stripped my innocence, I'd kill him. He messed me up, and I'm poor, and it's hard to get help. So in a series of tweets, she suggested that he get help to work with his anger, and he replied that he's antisocial, he doesn't trust people. And he lived in San Antonio, and she put out the word, and someone found him a therapist, and someone started a GoFundMe so he could afford to go to a therapist. And it went on from there. He was able to get help and transformed his life. And you can sense how totally against our natural instincts it is to be on the receiving end of an attack like that. The natural reaction is to defend and self-protect. But she was able to do something extraordinary. She was able to pause, kind of like take that sacred pause. She was able to feel like her hurt. But then somehow she was able to empathize with her attacker. She was able to role reverse and imagine the pain that he was feeling. And from her own back pain, that she, that started the connection and started the thread. It's really kind of just an extraordinary kind of modern moment of healing through Twitter. I always like to say that you're entitled to your first reaction. But if you can stay with your first reaction and let that first reaction pass through you like a wave, and then stay with the second and the third reaction, it can be quite magical. And to examine the primal instinct to self-protect, and then to lean into it, it can be incredibly transformative. I wanted to share a second story with you, which is, it's one I usually hold in reserve. I usually only share this once a year. If you've heard this one before, I don't think you're going to mind hearing it again, because every time I share this, I usually get choked up. On the train from Washington to Philadelphia, while on my way to my father's memorial funeral service, I sat down next to an interesting fellow who worked with young boys, particularly those in jail and prison, as part of an inner city project in Washington, D.C. And he told me this story. A young kid, 14 years old, wanted to get into a gang. The way that he proved himself to enter the gang was to shoot somebody. It was an initiation rite. He shot this kid he didn't even know. He was apprehended, brought to trial, and at the end of the trial, convicted. Just before he was taken away in handcuffs, the mother of the boy who was shot stands up, looks him in the eye, and says, "I am going to kill you," and sits down. After being in prison for a year or so, the boy is visited by that mother, and he's kind of frightened. She says, "I've got to talk to you." They have a little bit of a conversation. And as she leaves, she says, "Do you need anything? Cigarettes?" And leaves him a little money. She starts to visit him. She goes every few months, and over the course of 3 or 4 years, she starts visiting him more regularly and talking to him. When he's about to get out at the age of 17 or 18, she asks, "What are you going to do?" And he says, "I have no idea. I got no family, no nothing." And she says, "Well, I've got a friend who's got a little factory. Maybe I can help you get a job." So she arranges that with a parole officer. And then she asks, "Where are you going to stay?" And he says, "I don't know where I'm going to stay." And she says, "Well, I have a spare room, and you can stay with me." So he comes and stays in the spare room, takes this job, and after about 6 months, she says, "I really need to talk with you. Come into the living room, sit down, let's talk." She looks at him and says, "Remember that day in court when you were convicted of murdering my son for no reason at all to get into your gang? And I stood up and said, 'I'm going to kill you'? Yes, ma'am. I'll never forget that day, he says. She looks back and says, well, I have. You see, I didn't want a boy who could kill in cold blood like that to continue to exist in this world. So I set about visiting you, bringing you presents, bringing you things, and taking care of you. And now I have let you come into my house and got you a job and a place to live because I don't have anybody anymore. My son is gone, and he was the only person that I was living with. I set about changing you, and you're not that same person anymore. But I don't have anybody, and I want to know if you'd stay here. I'm in need of a son, and I want to know if I can adopt you. And he said yes, and she did. Can you imagine being able to do that? To me, it seems Herculean, unfathomable. But it feels true. So when you're smacked down, the natural impulse in life is towards self-protection. It's utterly natural, and if that instinct didn't exist in you, you wouldn't be here. But when we look at evolutionary biology, there is something in you that is connected with all other beings. And Thich Nhat Hanh calls it interbeing. It's our interconnectedness. And when you can hook up to that, the boundaries to the self get permeable. Your sense of self opens up, and you can begin to respond to life in a very, very different way. I honestly don't know if I could ever do what that woman did. Probably not. But I'm really touched by that story. And one of the things about these practices and these teachings is, on one level, they seem fantastical. But because they're based in reality, they have some ring of truth. Something resonates to it. When we hear of the Four Noble Truths, the four foundations of this whole philosophy, and that suffering is part of the human experience. If you look closely at your stress and suffering, you can find a cause. It's possible to let go. And that there's a path, there are practices and technologies that can help you to be less and less bound by stress and suffering. There's something about that feels true, inherently true. It doesn't mean it's hard, kind of impossibly hard. But when we stay in this practice of opening to our challenges as a practice, we can begin to build some verified faith. We find out where we're stuck, we examine it, we realize that we can let go of what we're holding on to. We feel a greater sense of peace, and that continues to inform our practice. So the question becomes, how do we live our lives in a way that can open to embrace life and all its difficulties? I know I've shared this before, but I love the fact that there's a men's group. It's called M3, Men Meeting for Meditation, here in D.C. And they have a little sharing after they meditate, and they share about their AFGO, AFGO. And so, my AFGO this week is, and then they share about it. So mild translation, I'm going to change one word slightly. AFGO is another freaking growth opportunity. when you begin to see growth opportunities everywhere, it's a different shift. And someone told the story of how he was working as a freelancer and he had too much work going on. He just couldn't handle all his work. He knew he had to hire someone, so it was a big, big risk for him, and he hired someone to help him out, and he actually kind of had subsidized him. He took less pay in order to bring on this person to help him, and it was working pretty well. Not really well, but it was helping him a little bit. And suddenly this person he hired quit. And then huge obstacle in his life. He had to produce a whole lot of stuff, and as he was complaining, he realized, I'm stuck. I'm stuck here forever. I'll never get out of this. And when he slowed down and thought, okay, how could this be a growth opportunity? He looked a little closer and he thought, well, what am I believing here? Well, I'm believing that I'm stuck and I'll never get out of this situation. And as we've explored here before, it can be very interesting to investigate those beliefs. Is it true that you're stuck here forever and you'll never get out of it? Who are you without that thought? It opened up a little bit of room, and he mentioned it to a friend. And his friend also had too much work going on. And they decided that between them they would hire someone and kind of share that person between them. And they ended up forming kind of a consortium. And they ended up actually going into business together and sharing their tasks and their responsibilities, and opened up all kinds of new possibilities for both of them. And in many ways, it really came from seeing a problem as an opportunity. So I was doing a little bit of online research on this topic, and they always say that there are two basic schools. There's the school of self-improvement, of just getting better, and then there's the school of liberation, of really getting free. And there's a lot of self-help stuff out there on obstacles, which remind me of that line. This guy goes to the library and says to the librarian, "Can you tell me where the self-help section is?" And the librarian says, "Wouldn't that be defeating the purpose?" So if you look online, you'll see these headlines: 4 ways to turn obstacles into opportunities, 10 strategies for turning obstacles into opportunities, the leadership challenge, obstacles and opportunities, 20 quotes to turn your obstacles into opportunities. And I'll save you some reading. The essence of them all really is, it's about your belief, and it's about your attitude. Is it possible when you hit a wall to convert this into an opportunity for growth? When you wake up too ill to go to work, it's an opportunity to slow down, to listen to your body and to heal. If someone gives you really intense feedback, well, could that be an opportunity to really learn how you show up in someone's world? When you experience rejection, it could be an opportunity to ask yourself what you really, really want in life. So seeing life as a series of growth opportunities is a very different philosophy from many. I always love that philosophy that's summed up in this line, that life is a sexually transmitted disease with a 100% mortality rate. It's very different. And so the question becomes, is it possible to view your life and your challenges as opportunities for growth and for building mastery? In the tradition in which I spent many, many years, the kind of the founding teacher talked of how in the quest for enlightenment, whatever that means, full awakening, that when you fully awaken, the very first thing you do spontaneously is you offer pranams, or you bow. You bow to your deepest challenges, because it was those challenges that forged who you are. Michael Jordan, who's arguably the best basketball player in the world, was cut from his high school team. And it was that moment of rejection that set something inside him to want to be the very, very best. Tom Brady, arguably the greatest football player of all time, was sort of an afterthought when he was drafted into the NFL. And that chip on his shoulder really just fueled him in his practice. Oprah Winfrey was demoted from being co-anchor of a Baltimore TV station. And again, something in that rejection, she was able to convert that in a powerful way. J.K. Rowling, who wrote the Harry Potter series, had 12 rejections, was on welfare, sold her first book for $4,000, now worth about $1 billion. So the question becomes, how have your greatest obstacles in life forged who you are? Perhaps we can do a little reflection. If you like, you can close your eyes. You might take a few moments to slow down your breath. I'd like to offer kind of a two-part reflection. When you think about your life journey, what would you say are the three biggest challenges you've dealt with in your life? You might take a few moments just to sense the kind of the wounding of those challenges, just how hard it was. And what have you learned from those challenges? Was there any gift? You might take a moment now to reflect. What would you say right now is your biggest obstacle, your biggest challenge? Is there something you're complaining about? Something that's between you and feeling really happy? Just take a few moments to kind of identify one current challenge or growth opportunity. I'd like to offer just a few inquiries around this. You might take a moment just to kind of lean into whatever this may be. Can you visualize that? Can you see it? And as you reflect on this challenge or this obstacle, as you think about it now, what does it feel like on the inside? Can you locate how this lives in your nervous system? Is there an emotional word that resonates with this feeling, this felt sense inside? And is there a sense of what you're believing about this situation? What would you say is the core belief? And you might inquire, is it true? Do you know that it's true? And who are you without that belief? Is there a sense of what the lesson is here for you? The opportunity for developing greater skill, developing some mastery in your life? And if you like now, you can deepen your breath. And if you like, you can open your eyes. There's something so profound when I look back and I think of how the greatest challenges in my life have resulted in, usually, in me developing some clearer seeing about life, or maybe a little more compassion. I generally find the most interesting people I run into are people who really suffered and really gone through it. Because there's a quality of wisdom, a quality of clear seeing, and a quality of compassion that they have, a quality of empathy that they've cultivated through their own growth. There's someone from my yoga ashram days. Was pretty much the most flexible person I'd ever seen in my life. And he got inspired a long time ago to become a yoga teacher. And for a while, he was the worst yoga teacher ever. He simply did not understand the challenges that people encountered who were less flexible than him. He had no language to support people who didn't know how to instantly go into this magnificent posture. That's why Shunryu Suzuki said, those who struggle the most have the most compassion. They're the ones who develop the empathy, the language to really connect. A friend of mine, Tony Mayo, who lives in Reston, is an executive coach, really good executive coach, and we were having a conversation about this very topic. And he wrote this to me. He said, I sent him the Shunryu Suzuki quote, and he said, "This reminds me of my experience with relationships and communication. My clients are often astounded by my tales of bad behavior and callous interactions, of how I still offend and insult. I explain that I studied and became an expert at human relations because I was not a natural, because my role models were terrible, because I felt the pain of isolation, loneliness, and rejection down into the marrow of my bones. That pain is the motivation for the many trainings and experiments and teachings that I've invested in. I could not be the best coach if I was raised more happily or was spared many lashes. Some days I value that, and many I think the price was too high, and that is the way that it turned out. When I meet someone who is an incredibly eloquent speaker, who had a major stuttering issue as a kid, and see how they've transformed this wound into a gift into the world, it's such a representation of what each of us can do, is to really sense how our liabilities become opportunities to become more whole, to cultivate a greater sense of wisdom, and maybe even more importantly, a great sense of empathy and compassion for other people who are struggling. So embracing your AFGOs is what it's all about. Why don't we close with a short little reflection? Letting your eyes close. Feeling this movement of the breath on the inside. And noticing the movement of the breath. And the aliveness of sound. And sensing on the inside a perception of pulse or tingling, of aliveness. And sensing who you are as the one who is aware. And sensing this journey. And the time will come when, with elation, you will greet yourself arriving at your own door, in your own mirror, and each will smile at the other's welcome and say, "Sit, here, eat." You will love again the stranger who was yourself. Give wine, give bread, give back your heart to itself, to the stranger who has loved you all your life, whom you ignored for another who knows you by heart. Take down the love letters from the bookshelf, the photographs, the desperate notes. Peel your own image from the mirror. Sit. Feast on your life. And as you're ready, you can deepen your breath. As you're ready, you can open your eyes. Thanks for your time and your attention. If you embrace your life as a never-ending set of growth opportunities, you're going to need some cookies. They're waiting for you on your way out the door. Thank you so much. I'll be back next week for what will be our last class for the year. We'll have Christmas and New Year's Day. We'll not be having class. So enjoy.